What is a strategy to promote your podcast interview as a guest? As with all marketing, planning and delivering through a strategy that has been thought out will deliver far better results than throw it against the wall and see what sticks. By following these steps, you can build your own strategy that fits with your content marketing plans to promote your episode outbe. You should promote your podcast interview as a guest before and after it happens, and think of it as evergreen content. You can repurpose it much longer after it has been published than a guest blog post. That way, your interview will become one of the evergreen episodes of the podcast that both old and new listeners of the show can enjoy.
Pre-launch checklist. All systems go.
On average, podcast hosts will give you a release date of the episode you are appearing on. Newer hosts with less shows under their belts may record and release the next week, whereas shows that have a mature process could release the episode a month or two afterwards. But in any case, you need to be prepared.
2 weeks to go.
Prepare a checklist of all the platforms you have a presence on and can publish your show episode. If you have an email list or newsletter, then prepare a campaign ready to go out to that audience. Plan how you can maximize the audience reach and build up momentum. Simple things like adding a link to your email signature can build awareness, but do upfront work as much as possible to set up promotion. Ask the host if they provide branded graphics, logos, or shareable content. This could be images, video snippets, or all the social messaging to share. This will save you time, but also means that you have messaging planned and ready to go.
1 week to go.
Let's make some noise. Start to build up momentum for your episode by stating you have appeared and it will be live shortly. Get this message out across your social platforms. Monitor any feedback or comments. Also look at the best time to publish. If you use social publishing tools, then this normally gives you this as a statistic. With the pre-work from the week before, start to prepare posts that contain snippets or teasers from your interview and use these as headlines for your posts. Include the title of the show. If you have any photos or video screenshots, use these as headline images and make sure you have branding locked and loaded. If the host has provided branded content, then this will be quicker and easier. If not, then unless you are a designer, you can get this done quickly and low cost on services such as Fiverr or Upwork. A key element to make sure you do not miss is to tag the host, the podcast itself, and make sure you ask them for the social identities and places they would like to be tagged. Also, a top tip is to ask them for the hashtags that they use and get the best traction on. They have done the research and have the data to see which has gained the most audience. Final top tip, schedule a post per day this week. Do not go crazy and put out multiple posts per day, as this will saturate the audience. You need to build up interest before the release. Post-launch, heading to the moon. With any promotion, you need to keep the momentum moving forward. The most successful book launches are based on keeping people aware that the book is for sale after it has launched, and keep that moving. Set up a schedule of promotion across all your platforms, the same as a lead up, not daily but intermittent, to keep your audience aware, but also to request they promote out your episode, but also remind them why. What value are they getting from the interview? What sound bites can they share out from what you have discussed? Don't just promote your podcast interview right when it goes live. Post-launch, you can step back and think about how to get more people to listen. Share your interview and get more listeners for the host who will be looking at the show data.
We have landed.
Guest podcasts can be repurposed long after they have been published. Long-form blog content can have a long lifespan, podcasts even longer. What you say now, as long as it remains relevant and gives the listener knowledge, can remain as evergreen content for not just months but years afterwards. You can even use that content if something is being discussed in the future that you can anchor back to your thinking within the podcast itself. This is PR at its finest. Link your content to news that is relevant then, and you will gain more credibility for forecasting trends. Stating you were talking about this X time period ago, the concept is to keep your content relevant no matter what the time frame is. So, when thinking about the idea for your interview together with the hosts of the podcast, think about something that's always relevant, or a broad subject area that can be revisited in the future, even so you can appear on the show again. Here's a short checklist of evergreen topics to help you get started.
Launching a book. How to save money. Lessons learned from growing a business. Who was the most influential people in your career? Best nomadic travel destinations and why?
If you record an episode that is only relevant for a short period of time, such as news, movie review, statistics, etc., then it will become obsolete over a long period.
Key strategies to promote your podcast appearance.
With these methods, promoting your podcast appearance isn't as difficult as you might think. You can choose just one or combine several to get the best results. Guest podcasting is one of the cheapest and best ways to place your products and services in front of new audiences. It allows you to lend a voice to your expertise and thought leadership. While it requires preparation, effort, time, and most importantly, promotion, it doesn't really require any out-of-the-pocket expenditures. Podcast guest appearances are a powerful method for lead generation. Still, people often don't get the best results of being podcast guests because they fail to promote the podcast episode to their audiences. Regardless of the audience and size of the podcast, being a guest is about sharing valuable and quality content to the podcast listeners to connect with them. Let's discuss some of the best podcast promotion strategies that you can use to get the best results out of your podcast interview.
Hosting your podcast episode on social media platforms.
Almost all hosts use social media channels to announce new episodes of their show because about 4.5 billion people use social media. You can ask the podcast host to provide you with graphics that you can share on social media. You can also make marketing materials regarding your guest podcast to share on various social media, including Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Reddit, and Twitter. While sharing your guest podcast on Twitter and Instagram accounts, don't forget to use hashtags and a shortened link that you can track or gain data on. Look at what other podcasts are doing and contact them to cross-promote podcast episodes to maximize your reach. You can search for Facebook groups that include your audience and share your full episode in relevant comments. Make sure that you don't join Facebook groups just for the sake of sharing your guest podcast. Instead, you'll need to contribute to the conversations and share the link to your guest podcast only where it makes sense according to the context of the group. By just promoting and not contributing, you will have a negative effect on your episode, but also your brand as a whole.
Key takeaway: post to your social accounts at the optimum time your audience is online. But track this using shortened links or tracking services. Use the data to understand how well it was received. Leverage a blog post.
Publishing a blog post with show notes that contains a link to your guest podcast episode can also help you a great deal. It's especially true if you already have an established blog. Make sure that you add a link to all the podcasters, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud, to allow the podcast listeners to find your guest podcast episode easily. Call out the key elements that are shared on your guest podcast. What is the educational value that you brought to the audience? Call these out and list them as key finds so that Google can find this and you get the SEO value from the post by providing helpful content to the visitor, not just keywords. If you don't have your own website, there are plenty of options to get started, such as medium.com to start publishing your content, and Thoughts, where you can also embed your podcast into their posting and target your audience using tags.
Key takeaway: a blog post allows you to share not only the podcast itself, but also the transcript and key findings from the episode. By producing helpful content in the post, you will be a friend of Google. Add your guest podcast episode to your website.
If the podcast host has sent you an HTML code, consider embedding it on your site. By showing your podcast interview on your website's homepage, you can drive new listeners to your guest podcast episode. It'll also allow you to build a long-term relationship with the host that'll increase the chances of appearing on the same podcast multiple times. The more listens on your guest podcast episode, the more the podcast host will be willing to invite you in the future. If you want to take things to a whole new level, consider embedding the podcast player on your website's landing page. It will allow your traffic to listen to your guest podcast episode without leaving your site, and also increase your visitors' time spent on site. You can also grab the embed code from one of the podcast host's sites if it has been made open, but it is a nice touch to ask the host for the embed code. In order to add this to your website, if you are using WordPress or other website platforms, there will be an option to add HTML into your page. Check out one of our blog posts to see what it looks like.
Key takeaway: by adding your podcast to your website, you are driving your audience to the main destination. Here they can find out more about you and what you are offering. The podcast itself will help improve the on-page time for your site, as people can listen to your episode whilst doing other activities, compared to reading content. But it also expands your audience to those that prefer to listen than read, and vice versa. Transcribe the audio content.
Many podcasts offer a complete transcript of the entire show, and you can also share that with your guest podcast posts. In addition, you can also use the highlighted portion of that long text and include them in show notes. Remember that the podcast transcripts are great tools to generate new leads. In addition, they bring SEO benefits to the table by adding links to your show notes page and lead capture forms to collect leads. Also, your transcript will contain key points that you can pull out easier than listening back to the whole podcast. But also, when you post this transcript, you can highlight these key educational points to your audience.
Key takeaway: transcripts help you find the key points points from your interview, but also you can then highlight these in the transcript itself. Or call them out across your social channels, mentioning the time that you discussed the key finding. Make a YouTube video.
You want to repurpose your guest podcast episode in as many ways as possible. For example, converting the podcast audio to a video and adding it to your YouTube channel offers the following benefits. If the host doesn't share a transcript, you can get it from YouTube with the help of its automatic transcribing tool. You can share the video on social media. It can help you with SEO. There are many great tools that you can use to convert audio to videos, such as Windows Live Movie Maker and iMovie. You can take this further by snipping the video into 15 minutes 59-second snippets and post as shorts, reels, or on TikTok. Use these to drive your marketing funnel, bring the audience to you.
Key takeaway: extending the content out from just audio to video means you are also extending your reachable audience. You can target them whilst also narrowing down the message. Create a dedicated email campaign.
Your guest podcast episode should find its way to your email campaigns. You should use it to invite as many people as possible to check out the content. Don't forget to add links to the landing page of your website and host social media or podcaster profile. You should send an invitation to your email list for the interview. It could be a special offer, a link to the podcast episode, or even just a short blurb about the interview. Do not forget to shout out to the host and thank them in the newsletter.
Key takeaway: plan your email campaign before the launch date and have your guest show as the key CTA with a giveaway link to it. Add your guest podcast episode to your email signature.
There is a little space at the end of each email you send from your work or personal email account. It's one of the most overlooked and underutilized digital marketing real estate pieces. You can utilize its power by adding the link to your guest podcast episode to help drive more listeners. A suitable call to action to listen to your guest podcast episode will allow you to promote your guest podcast post with each email you send.
Key takeaway: add this link to your email signature on the day it goes live. Keep it on your signature for 30 days, then swap out. This piece of real estate is seen every time you send an email, and on average this could be 50 times a day. Ask the podcast host to promote your episode.
You must confirm with the podcast host that there will be a marketing strategy against the podcast episode you're going to appear in. You can also offer a white paper or a free guide that the podcast host can access by going to your website. Bear in mind that you'll need to create a straightforward, clear, and easy to remember URL so that the listeners can access it later on. Double check you have provided the host with your headshot, website link you want to call out, and anything else they can use to promote you.
Key takeaway: be prepared. Do not make the host work for you. Provide them with all the marketing materials they can use to promote you: email, headshot, URL, etc. Add value to online communities.
There are tens of thousands of conversations on Twitter, Reddit, Quora, and Facebook. You can find the topics related to your guest podcast to add value to those conversations and discussions to drive more traffic. You can search each of the platforms mentioned above for forums and threads related to starting contributing by sharing the link to your guest podcast post. But you'll need to be very mindful as this strategy is a little tricky. First, you need to focus solely on becoming a part of the conversation without promoting your guest podcast episode. You don't want to sound promotional, and once people start taking your comments and input seriously, you can share your guest podcast post only with interested people. You can also contact other podcasters that have a similar audience to yours. You can go to Podcast Hawk and search for relevant podcasts, then contact them to see if you can appear on their shows.
Key takeaway: think about the value you can add to the community. Will your episode answer questions that have been raised in a clear, concise manner? Then post a link and be clear about your answer and where they can find it in the podcast episode. Run giveaways.
If you're a business owner, you would already know that giveaways are one of the best tools to build an audience. However, you should only be involved in this strategy if you have the budget and don't need to give away much. You can start a giveaway contest where the winner will get something valuable related to your business. For instance, you can give away 20 minutes of your consulting time about habits and productivity or whatever your expertise is. Send the audience to a pre-qualifier form that captures their details and set out questions that the audience needs to fill in so you know who they are and they fit your requirement. It's important not to give away something unrelated to your brand as an Amazon gift card. This way, you'll have an audience not interested in your products or services, and you don't want that. You want an audience that's not only interested in your brand, but also has the potential to become actual customers.
Key takeaway: giving your host's audience value beyond the show itself is gold. but also leveraging this method to drive a true call to action that will bring you their audience. Use your guest podcast episode in your events. If
you have an upcoming prospecting event, webinar, or seminar, consider incorporating highlights of your guest podcast episode into your presentation. It's one of the best ways to bring enrichment and value to your speech. You can also encourage your event attendees to check out your guest podcast posts. Another great way is to send a follow-up email containing a link to your guest podcast post to all the attendees after the event.
Key takeaway: plan a webinar or activity post your guest podcast episode that you can leverage your key takeaways into the presentation, and send out a link to it as part of the event follow-up. Give other contacts a shout-out.
While recording your podcast interview, look for the opportunities that you can utilize to give shout-outs to other non-competitive contacts and brands. It will allow you to tag those contacts and brands once your guest podcast episode goes live. This way, you'll be able to score some extra promotions from that contact or brand. You can also pull out the exact quote where you mention their service or product and ask them if they can share their podcast episode on their social media profiles. Make sure that you positively mention people and brands so that they can gladly share your guest podcast posts. You can also leverage this to link out in the podcast episode to people you respect in your niche and reference them.
Key takeaway: a very powerful strategy that is barely used but can pay dividends for opening up conversations with contacts you want to work with. Gain a shout out from them. Multiple ways you can use this to extend your credibility and expertise. LinkedIn article.
LinkedIn has been adding over time creators tools. You can now create not only blog posts, but also add audio to those posts. Create live events, but also send out a newsletter to subscribers on the platform and create live events, with some being just audio. Sharing your guest episodes, you can delve into LinkedIn groups and communities to share your sound bites and link back to your episode or a blog post that you have written and published on your personal company page. Don't forget to hashtag. These are powerful tags that are used across search results to find content. Spend some time to add relevant tags to your content so that new audiences can find you. Key takeaway: leverage LinkedIn for repurposing your episode, but also review your strategy overall, as a platform is more than just a business network. It is now becoming a business-focused creator content site, enabling live events, audio events, and newsletters all in one place with a targeted audience in easy reach.
Twitter threads and stories.
In terms of being able to share your guest podcast insights across Twitter, then Threads is a de facto method. Take your transcript and post it into a tool such as Typefully, and this will automatically create a thread for you. You can then edit it down to the insights, interesting snippets in the interview, and link it back to the interview, but also if the transcript has the timestamps, include that in the thread. The audience can go find the soundbite quickly. Twitter stories, you can search and find ones that are relevant and join them live, join in the conversation and drop in where suitable value bonds from your guest episode. To gain full value from this, include a link to the episode in your Twitter bio, or if you have a link page, add to that.
Key takeaway: maximize Twitter beyond standard posts. Leverage the power search on the platform to find individuals who could find your content insightful. By creating threads and sharing these with them rather than just "here is my podcast episode," you are enabling them to get snippets of value, which increases the chances of them going to actually listen to your episode. HROTRKEL.
Harrow is a tool journalists use to obtain sources for their stories, while Stirkle is a similar site but easier to gain a link out to. Both platforms and others work on the basis you provide a response to a question raised on the platform. It could be something like provide your insights into what a SaaS company could do to increase lead generation, upon which if you had been on a podcast related you could provide a response with a soundbite from your episode. These platforms are best used to reach a wider audience on platforms that you wouldn't normally be able to reach out to, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, etc.
Key takeaway: these platforms are always looking for new sources to provide insightful responses for stories. Audiograms.
An audiogram is a shareable video consisting of a static background, an audio waveform, transcribed captions, and an audio voiceover from your guest podcast. They are often used as promotional trailer for podcasts. Think of it as your movie trailer introduction. It allows people to have a taste of the episode and entice them to listen to the whole episode. They have spoke about voice building trust with the audience, but on social and sharing in general, visuals are key, and hence this allows you to add a visual element to your voice and message.
Key takeaway: simple to create and taking minutes of time. These are a powerful medium to anchor your voice to your brand through visuals. Include content from the podcast host and stamp your logo on there. Either way, you have now built a trailer to the podcast episode. Final words. Promoting your guest podcast episode can draw more traffic to your website, develop sales leads, enhance partnerships, but the key takeaway is you build credibility and paint a picture to the world that you are the domain authority for the subject discussed. Hence, you cannot stop at just one show, but it needs to be a continuous strategy. Appearing on more podcast shows is similar to how you remember media superstars. You hear them multiple times talking, sharing insights, speaking at events. You get the idea. We hope this guide will help you promote your guest podcast post to reaffirm yourself as an industry expert and maximize your exposure to a wider audience. It also can appreciate that this is like any strategy. You need a plan that you deliver against, and over time this will pay you back. Nothing in life is easy.